Thank you all for being here. This exhibition is called Shackled But Empowered. This was part of the original concept that Gordon Yellowman and I had for the exhibition. And the reason was it was talking about this particular ledger art, which is Fort Marion ledger art. And it's a very distinct type of ledger art that you see in indigenous culture. But it's part of prisoner art. And it was part of the incarceration of 72 Cheyenne, Arapaho, Caddo, Comanche, and Kiowa artists that were taken from Oklahoma to Fort Marion, Florida in 1875 and incarcerated until 1878. So I'm not going to go over what's in the exhibition because that would spoil the surprise. So I hope that after this or before this, you guys go into the exhibition and take a look, walk around the room, see how Gordon and I laid the entire space out, and truly enjoy it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what is ledger art, how did it come about that these guys were incarcerated, 71 men and 1 woman incarcerated in Fort Marion, and then what is the legacy of this incarceration today? So that's how we're going to begin this journey. So the first one is, what is ledger art? So a lot of people ask what this is, and this name alone is kind of a misnomer in that people started calling ledger art, which was paintings done in the 1800s in accounting books or on ledgers. And the reason this occurred is because in the pre-Columbian period and historic period, you had pictographic writing that was done on rock art. If you came to the Spiro show, you would have seen it on shell and copper, but you saw it on hide paintings and you see it on teepees. And these kind of fall into 2 primary categories, where you have tribal histories, which is winter counts, which I figured out this little thing doesn't work. So let's say the lower right corner is a ledger count, and so it's a calendar history of the community. But the other drawings we see typically, which could be done on rock art, but more historically on teepees or other hides, are pictographic writing that actually shows a person's war honors. They actually are condoned. You guys can't hear? So let's get down here. Okay, this is, hello? Oh my gosh. All right, let's just, all right, here we go. I can't just bend down that low. Let's see what we can do here. Let's see if I can maybe lean in like this. How about this? Got a bit of a gate here. I'm going to put it on the carpet so it doesn't move. How about that? All right. I'm sorry, everyone over here. You're just, I'll swing back whenever I can. So where were we? Rock art, hide paintings. Oh, teepee designs. So teepee designs, so these were done, these were honors that a given warrior might take, and they were socially justified. They were sanctioned within the larger community, and then they would be able to put these designs on their teepees, and everyone in the community would be able to see this. And so knowing that, sometimes you have a medicine doctor might put his doctoring medicine on the exterior of a teepee. A warrior would put their honors on there, and that was just a way to socially communicate who they were, but everyone agreed upon these. And so they're very powerful images. And then the ledger books, like I said before, when you stopped acquiring hides, and there was a lot of reasons for this. 1, they're organic. B, they're very difficult to do a painting on a hide and then try to roll it up and try to move it in a very nomadic way, which is on a travois or other ways. And then you also have the destruction of the bison, which limited the amount of buffalo hides that could be produced and utilized for this. So you see the acquisition either through trade or through taking in war, ledger books. And what people began to do is you could put an entire community history or individual history in these books, and then you could put them in a saddlebag and move on. So it became way easier. But that became the generic term for what we call today ledger art. And some of these paintings may not be taken from a direct ledger book. They could have been done in plain pieces of paper. They could have been done in art books. But regardless, that's what we kind of uniformly refer to this as. And it's a tradition that's ongoing today, and a lot of contemporary artists still paint on ledger. And I make a distinction myself in that you have ledger artists back in the day who painted war honors on these or tribal histories. And then today I feel you have artists who paint on ledger. And one is one that would have been probably more war-based as opposed to art-based. So this good-looking fella here in the middle is Gordon Yellowman. And Gordon and I got together about 4 years ago. And this is how this exhibition really began. Gordon and I got together and we started thinking, well, you know what? When you start looking at the ledger pieces here, these ledgers are very exact. There is no mistaking what is being depicted. And that is because if you go back to what I said before, it is socially sanctioned and everyone agrees upon the image, but they need to be exact so everyone understands what is being communicated. You do not have an alphabet. You have a pictographic writing system. And so it's important that the images you produce are very exacting. So with that in mind, Gordon and I began looking, as we do, at headdresses. But in the bottom left corner, you can see here, there are different types of lances. One is a crooked lance society. You could see teepee, and you could see heraldry. You could see the heraldry of the painted teepee, of shield designs. And so we began thinking, you know, we can identify, if not the individual, we can identify the societies in here. And so we began to do that. And so you could see here's some teepee designs here. You could see the individual, which he was kind enough here to write his name. So that was kind of a, that helped me check that box pretty quick. But you could see his leggings are going to give us an indication of the society that he's in. The outfit or war shirt might do that too. And this is a war shirt from circa 1850 that we have in the collection. It is awesome. If you guys haven't been down to see it, do it. This is, like I said, circa 1850s, and it's got a beautiful painted design. It was just generally identified as Upper Missouri, but it's Cheyenne. And you can really tell that with the blue, white on the top, and the way the beading is done in the upper area. But you can also see in the exhibition the leggings here. And so note the leggings that you see here in this drawing. So very similar. And so you get society-style leggings that are going to show up. These are circa 1875. And you could see kind of, well, this poker doesn't work, but you could see his leggings. You see the little designs motifs on there? And these are the real things which you have in the gallery. And so those are things that Gordon and I were able to kind of look at and isolate within this. And I did not add this because I meant to add a picture in here, and I simply forgot. But we have a pair of leggings just like this as well, which are tan leather and then with blue fringe hanging off the bottom. Now, we got real lucky. So during COVID, this is when Gordon and I decided to do this, and like a moron, I'm in the middle of the Spyro show, and the Coomer Museum called and said, hey, do you guys have any exhibitions produced that you would be willing to loan, or any collections at the museum? Because they know that we have one of the best Native American art collections in the entire country. Not only from an art point of view, but from an archival point of view. The DRC is one of the best resources, not only in the state, but the region and the country. And part of the Silberman collection has a real depth that you just don't find anywhere else. So the DRC is truly an asset to this institution. And when you couple that with the paintings, you get people from across the country who call. And Holly called, and I'm like, sure we do. And I talked to Gordon. I'm like, let's do an exhibition on this. And then I woke up the next day and I said, but you're already doing one on Spyro. And I panicked for about a day, and then we just went ahead and did it. And it was great, and it was very successful. And then we actually then got a phone call from the old jail center in Texas, and they wanted to borrow the show too. And so the show you have here is a smaller version, is what we toured, and then we expanded it. We actually built a reproduction of Fort Marion's walls in the space, and then we added the items, and so none of that traveled. So everything you see here is a brand new configuration, and the configuration that Gordon and I both wanted when we originally started doing this. We wanted people to not only know who the Cheyenne people were and their daily lives in that first room, But then we wanted the guests to walk through those prison gates as well, and then see inside of Fort Marion. And we did the best we think we could do. So how the heck did all this start? So it's not enough that we put art back here, because art is layered. It's going to give us a context from the time in which it was created, the scenes in which it's being depicted, and why. And so you're not going to have any of this art if you do not have the battle for the Great Plains. And this really starts just after the Civil War. Now, it's there before. You have Texans coming in, causing trouble. They haven't stopped since. But for everyone else, they start coming in with the expansion of the railroads. And what you really have is a competition of resources. And that's at the heart of this. It's because you have new people that are moving into a region that's already occupied by folks. There's limited resources in these spaces. The train then is going to start moving across the continent. It's disrupting different patterns of animal wildlife, how they can progress, how they can move, but bring in new people who are going to then take advantage of those resources again and move on. So what you have is a massive battle that's starting to undertake here that will last on the southern plains for the next 15 or 10 to 15 years, and in the northern plains for the next 30. And there's some train routes and stuff that you can see just how massively it begins expanding. You also have the Dawes Act and other stuff that's bringing in Civil War soldiers and other people and trying to really expand. The United States, I'm just going to go off topic real quick. The Industrial Revolution and the expansion of the United States was probably a perfect storm. If you don't have those two things, you just don't have this occurring. So if it's not for the train, how do you get people moving out there? If you don't have the Industrial Revolution, how do you have the materials to build this kind of stuff? What you see happening in America is truly a perfect storm, that you have an influx of immigrants from across the world that's coming here, and there is now a massive competition of resources brought on by industrialization. It's happening everywhere. The difference here is in China, is in Europe, is you don't have an influx of tens of millions of immigrants walking into those spaces. You do back in the time of Khan, but it's just not happening at this period of time. So these drawings actually give us a really good indication of the type of wildlife we talked about before. The bison. Sorry about that. I just went back to it. The bison, turkeys, hunting antelope. You have these great depictions of real life. And so that's really what you're seeing here, is you see the world in which the Cheyenne were embedded in, the world in which they grew up in, and then the world in which Europeans and others from across the globe, Chinese, freedmen, African Americans, everyone's moving out here. But it eventually leads to tragedy. And Sand Creek is probably the first of these. This happens in 1864 in Colorado. Then the same group of folks that were decimated by that massacre then moved down south. And after the Medicine Lodge Treaty and some others, there is another massacre here in Oklahoma called the Ouachita Massacre. So the 7th Cavalry with Osage Scouts actually tracks a band of Kiowa and Cheyenne who had, prior to this, been moved onto reservations but had not had enough land and resources given to them, and they began to go off and do what they have always done, which is hunt and get into scraps. And the 7th Cavalry tracks them down, and on the morning of November 27th, 1886 or 1868, they raid Black Kettle's camp and massacre everybody. And so that's kind of the beginning of the massive reservation systems and the first of these wars that's going to lead to Fort Marion. What we find, though, at this camp is, and what's in the exhibition, and this is truly special, is one of these things is this shield. This is Little Rock's shield. This was taken off the field of battle by Lieutenant Colonel Custer in 1868 and kept in his possession before it was given to the Detroit Institute of Science, later the Detroit Institute of Art, and it's the first time in 156 years it's ever been on loan, and it was loaned here. And so this has finally come home for the first time in 156 years. This is an amazing piece. Also, by coincidence, Bill and Janie Dupree, who many of you might know, actually donated the second rifle here in 2015 when I first came to the museum. And this was excavated during the Foss Creek Dam excavation. This was during their surveys, and this was pulled out of the Ouachita River. So this would have been a weapon that was owned by the Cheyenne, and then the Army, when they came in, bent the barrels, usually sometimes fired them, and then tossed them in the river so they wouldn't be used again. Both of these are in the exhibition. We include this because this exhibition, for the first time, you know, we talk about this from an academic perspective. We can talk about it from a museum perspective, but every aspect of this went through and was vetted and came from a Cheyenne perspective. And this was the shield they wanted in here. This was the gun they wanted in here, because this was an important story to tell. What came out of this is awesome, because you see the second shield here? About 3 weeks ago, a colleague of mine, I was telling him about what we were doing. I was explaining the shield, how incredible the shield was, because I think I've seen the shield, and sends me an image. He goes, "It wasn't the shield I thought it was this shield." And then I about had a heart attack, because that's this shield, the shield we have in the exhibit. This is that shield's dualistic mate. This shield here was identified as Osage and is at the Museum of Leather in Frankfurt, Germany. And it's identified as Osage, and it's not. If you'll recall before, who were the scouts for the 7th Cavalry the day of the Ouachita Massacre? The Osage. This was a war trophy they took off that field as well, and then eventually traded it in 1922 when it went to Europe. And so you could see the reason these are dualistic. Now move this. See the designs here? And then you can't see this. You can't see this, but there are 4 mountains here which represent the 4 cardinal directions. It's on green with a field of black. Green representing our world here and the 4 cardinal directions. This is the night sky. And you have the crescent moon at the top facing down. And then below it is the Pleiades, which is a constellation in the night sky. The opposite shield here is on a field of green with a black mountain, and that's the day sky with the sun and an upper crescent moon. I think there might be a 3rd shield, but right now I've only got those 2. What's cool about the Pleiades too, if you went to the Spiro exhibition, is one of the gorgets that was in there, which is circa 1400, has the exact same motif on it. And then if anyone here is familiar with the Nebra sky disk, which is from about 1600 BC in Northern Europe, it's got the exact same image on it as well. They usually call this the 7 Sisters, but it's the Pleiades, and it is cool. So, after the Ouachita Massacre, you have a treaty. And so these treaties come about. Indigenous communities here, the Cheyenne, the Kiowa, the Southern Plains communities, they're all moved on the reservations. And you can see here a depiction of the passing out of annuities. And so the annuities start to be passed out, and the government is obligated sugar, flour, coffee, meat, and full rations, and farming equipment that's supposed to allow people to live a more sedentary lifetime. And they didn't, which led to the Red River War. So the government had one singular purpose, and that was the complete destruction of indigenous communities, point blank. They said it. That's what they wanted to do. They encouraged the destruction of the bison. And so when the government promises annuities and your number one way of gaining meat is through bison and hunting, and you destroy upwards of 80 million bison, you're kind of in a lot of trouble. And so I can't blame the folks one bit. The Kiowa, the Comanche, and all these communities revolted, left the reservation, and this led to the Red River War. And so you could see some of the images here. Those are the one in the middle is the those are the bones of bison that were stacked up in one given location. I mean, people were just shooting them off of trains. and then the hides. And so what you see here is the trains are moving more and more folks out. You also have industrialization, once again, is actually found a faster way to process the hides and then get them into the commercial market. So, you know, like most materialism, it's just constant. The more you can make, the faster you can do it, the more we're going to do it. But eventually, this leads to the surrender. Now, please forgive me, these are Kiowa. And I know we're talking about the Comanche, or the Cheyenne, but these are such rad drawings, I could not include them. And this picture here on the left shows the surrender of the Cheyenne Kiowa to Lieutenant Pratt. Some might know him as Captain Pratt. That was his Civil War rank, but he's lieutenant. And then the movement to Fort Sill. And that's where you have another reservation, and that is the beginning of the journey east. It begins at Fort Sill, and then it starts going to Caddo, Oklahoma, before it goes up to Fort Leavenworth, St. Louis, Indianapolis, Nashville, Atlanta, and Fort Marion. It's done by train, and what's really neat is look at the artistry here of this drawing. It's phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal. And one thing we haven't been able to do, which is what something Gordon and I still want to be able to do, is contact some of the historical societies in Indianapolis to get photographs of these events, because they would have been highly publicized events, and those images would definitely have been in those drawings. So, but then you also see them taking ships, and so this is pretty cool. And so you see a whole different way of life. I mean, I can't even imagine. You know, you grow up here, you're just relegated to the plains, you're nomadic, but then all of a sudden, now you're being shipped through big cities, you're on the ocean, and you're just kind of getting a whole different way of life, just kind of thrust upon you overnight. And look, again, this is just so much fun. I mean, you could see the paddle boat here. I mean, the exactness to these drawings, I'm going to back up here one too, is just outstanding. And this has been the subject of great debate between myself and Gordon and others, is perception of these drawings. Because we don't have the artist actually telling us what they were thinking and how they were doing this. So a lot of this we're coming at from purely an artistic perspective, a historic perspective, and a cultural perspective. So on the one on the left, how many people think one has got clearly one train? How many people think the one on the left is one train or two? Who says one? Who says two? Everyone else? Gordon and the Cheyenne say it's one, and it shows movement. And so sometimes what they'll do is they'll have like little buffalo hooves through here, or they'll have a horse, and you'll see 5 horses in the scene, but that just means the horse is running. So then it becomes an interesting conversation on perspective. You know, how we view something versus how someone else views something. And so that's why it's always really important to collaborate, talk, and have conversations. And so it just kind of changes the narrative a little bit. So anyway, they take these giant circuitous route. They're all over the United States. They're moving down south, and they arrive in Fort Marion, Florida. That is the lighthouse that is still at Fort Marion. And so you can see in these drawings the lighthouse that is being depicted there. Now, if we have back to the original conversation about accuracy and why it's so important, that again lends the credence to all of the rest of the drawings that you're seeing, because there is an accuracy to all of these. And you could still see, I mean, they nailed it. And so when they arrive at Fort Marion, and a lot of times people don't really know the chain of events that occurs at Fort Marion, but the first 6 months that they're there, Lieutenant Pratt is associated with Fort Marion, but he's not the commander there for the first 6 months. The first 6 months, it's the commander of the St. Francis Barracks, and all of these soldiers are kept shackled and chained and in their rooms. They are guarded 24 hours a day, and they hardly can move about the entire area. There's guard posts everywhere, and so they're relegated to this fort in Florida, which heavy humidity, disease, It's a difficult lifestyle. 6 months later, Pratt is given command of this. He requested it and was given it. He comes in immediately, and he does remove the shackles. He no longer allows anyone to live there. He dismissed all of the military soldiers. But what you have is he then says he wants to change the Cheyenne perspective. He's going to acculturate them to the United States way. So the drawings that you see here are actually the Cheyenne. And so from previous drawings, and I probably should have put them up, you might see folks with different head links and different sizes, different regalia on. That helps you identify through heraldry who the given individual was. All of the scenes that move forward in the fort, they're all the same height. They all have the same hair. So you could see a removal of the individual of these paintings now, in these paintings. And you see the army as a whole, or now you see the uniformity of what became these prisoners.
So the writing is from the
Yes. So, but not entirely. The writing is generally from, I believe, Pratt or one of the agents down there, and they were writing these things down. So these drawings came in two forms. Sometimes Pratt, when he first got there, ordered pencils, which you can see in the show, and books down from New York, and he gave them to all of the artists, warriors, and individuals there. And then they would sometimes sell these as books, but often they were sold as individual pieces to persons, and someone would write down what it depicted. So that's where you get the writing. But then entire books were produced that Pratt created and had Zotom and several other of these guys produce, and he gave them to government agents across the United States or patrons who were actually paying for the pencils, for the supplies, for the schooling, and some other things. And then if that was the case, they were given complete books, which we had on display here a while back. And Pratt would narrate each scene on the bottom to give you context to what you were looking at. And that's how we know some of these places we've identified, where's the Idle Georgia? Indianapolis, excuse me. We've identified Indianapolis as one of the scenes and Nashville as one of the scenes because one of the persons that actually got the book wrote it and said, this is what it depicts, which is pretty cool. Uh-huh. Oh, it's just a curiosity? Yeah. I think that maybe you could see it as art, but maybe from simply a European perspective, but there's no diminishing European perceptions at the time, so I would look at this as more of a curiosity. But also a very paternalistic element as well, because you're sitting here with this perception that you are helping someone become civilized, for lack of a better word, you know, whatever the hell that means. But you know what I mean. So it doesn't have the art perception. But to that point, this is the first known example that I'm aware of the commercialization of Native American art drawings. Now, it's not to say that things weren't traded. They were. They were object-based items. They were pelts. They were beadwork. They were outfits. They were regalia. This stuff happens all the time. So people have been trading shirts and everything else for forever. But as far as drawings go, these are the first time I know that they've been sold. Maybe, Denise? Yeah? We got an art historian here, so I got to make sure I'm like, all right. So drawings, signing them. Oh, to your point, a few of the pieces that we have in our collection, it actually was signed by Zotom. So later on, I'll show you an image of them in school. And so they're actually had to go to church. They were going to school. There were several teachers that came to the fort voluntarily, and they taught English. And so these guys were taught English on a regular basis. But after Pratt came in here too, they built that little building that you see there on top of the Palisades. That didn't exist before. So they built it there. They often slept up there. And this is a depiction of them tarring the roof. But they were also free to go into town. They were free to go swimming. There were 2 sailboats there, and you could see them sailing in the ocean. And then you can also see a depiction of them camping on Anastasia Island. And they're actually fishing. They shark fish. There's a great drawing that we have of them, 10 guys hauling in a giant shark that they had been fishing for, which is pretty cool. But you can also see the ladies there. So there are women that have accompanied them on these trips, and these might sail 18, 20 miles away, come back, camp out on this island. They can kind of come and go in the fort as they please at this time. Once Pratt kind of comes in, it's just kind of wide open. And so they began collecting shells on this island. They would polish them up. Alligator teeth were known to be sold, various other things. So it's not just these drawings. In the exhibition down there, we have a ceramic vessel that was painted by Bear's Heart. So they painted a vase. There's also a cutout piece of canvas that would have been used at dances. So there are almost weekly dances that are taking place in the fort, and people are viewing these dances as well. And so money is being, these guys are being paid for this. So they're given the books, and then they're being paid for the drawings they produce, the shells that they create, and everything else. And then they send some of this money home, or they're actually going into town and purchasing supplies. This is a very good image too. This comes from our Dickinson Research Center. So you could see there's a drawing which you'll see in the exhibition of a 2 men teaching archery lessons. And then you can also see one of the classrooms in the lower drawing that was done. And then there's a Harper's Journal from May 10th, 1878, showing those exact same scenes that are being depicted in the drawing. So again, I go back again, and I'm just going to hammer it over. The accuracy that you see in these drawings is pretty cool. But these drawings were not just about their time in the fort. These drawings, and people were allowed to do anything. Right now, I think we've tracked down about approximately 1,400 drawings that were done at Fort Marion. They're in private collections, they're in museum collections, and I think there's probably thousands of more out there. Some of them naturally would have been probably kept in homes, destroyed, not known what they were, but others I think are still floating around. They're in historical societies. And so the goal now is to keep your eye out for these. You never know where they are, but they're a really important piece, and you never know what's going to be depicted in them. We have 4 books at this museum. 3 of them were done at Fort Marion, and 1 was done by Silverhorn later in the 1890s. But they incorporate daily life, and that's why I wanted to add these. These drawings are not just about the life that's being lived inside the fort. They go back to the daily life. They show the Cheyenne for what they loved the most, what they did: hunting, courting, and war scenes. And so you can see just a little bit of both. And again, this goes back to Gordon and I talking about the blankets that would have been worn. I think it's really cool. You see the parasol that's being, I want one of those. So if anyone finds one of those too, please let me know. And remember, we love donations. But what's really cool about those is the Comanche and the Kiowa raided Houston in the early 1860s, and they stole a whole shipment of these umbrellas and parasols. And then after that, these things are everywhere. And I was actually at my niece's soccer game this weekend with one, so, I mean, I get it. So, anyway, these scenes are really pretty neat. But the end part of this exhibition, when you go around the corner, is also the legacy of Fort Marion. So you can talk about what happened at the fort. And they were imprisoned until 1878. Now, at the end of that incarceration, 22 of the prisoners elected to stay. 17 went with Pratt to Virginia, and kept their schooling going. He then starts Carlisle Academy, and there are some bad reputations for some of these schools later on, but I think it's probably also a testament and worthy having a conversation about Pratt as an individual as well, that 22 people wanted to stay. 5 of them went and lived with families, and 17 actually took on school and went to school where they continued to learn to read and write for the next many, many years. So that's a big one. And then the legacy we have today, this is a painting, hold on a second. This is a painting by Gordon Yellowman, which is in the exhibition. Now note, none of the faces have paint in them. And this is the ghosts of Fort Marion. 5 of the folks that went there died and never came home. And so in that, you will also see a video in the exhibition, which is an honoring ceremony that was done 2 years ago where they could lay these guys to rest, which had never been done. But this painting is a powerful, I think, full circle for the tribe and for Gordon to really talk about not only the people that went there, but those who never came back, but also how today we still live with this legacy, and we're still coming to terms with it. And again, you see other art, but I thought this was probably the most fitting contemporary piece to go in the show, and even more so by Gordon, who is the peace chief of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes and the co-curator.